Okay, welcome to Don't Mind Me, I'm Different, the podcast where we smack down the shadow surrounding ADHD and depression in the workplace. I'm Ron, your ADHD guy, and I'm here to be your guide, your voice, and your reminder that you're not alone. I got your back. Each episode will unpack the real struggles, share powerful tools, and build strategies to help you stop seeing it as a problem, but a true force to be reckoned with. Together, we're making it cool to be different.
For some reason, I had gotten emotional, and I basically jump kicked the door in one of the classrooms and
Yeah.
literally unhinged it. Like literally, it was like one
Wow.
of those days. Uh,
So welcome back to the show, my beautifully different brains. I'm Ron Sowers, your host, your ADHD guy. And today we're diving deep into a conversation that many of us with ADHD or raising kids with it can relate to. I'm joined by Wayne Wright Yu, GM and director at Amazon, a fellow neurodiversity advocate, and a ADHD and leadership coach who didn't discover his own neurodivergence until later on in life, after his kids were diagnosed. In this show, we unpack everything from what it means to grow up feeling different to the moment you realize your strengths have been there all along. We talk parenting, homeschooling, cultural expectations, character strengths, and how mindfulness has become a powerful tool in both of our journeys. If you ever felt out of sync with the world around you, but haven't known why, or you're on a mission to parent differently, especially with a kid that you feel has ADHD or know they have ADHD, this episode is for you. So Wayne, when did you first realize your brain worked a little differently?
it's funny, Ron, because I guess my sense is that there's always been that doubt in the back of my mind for many years,
Mm-hmm.
but I only associated with sort of ADHD and these types of things very, very late in life. It was years after my kids were diagnosed, my two
Mm.
older ones, and I sort of learned about ADHD and learned that it's a genetic in nature, and so if your children have them, it's likely that one of the parents have them or somewhere else in the family. And I'll tell you, I first struggled to connect the two because one of
Mm.
the commonly talked about traits of ADHD is procrastination. And I don't procrastinate. And so I thought I
Yeah.
must not have this thing because I don't procrastinate. Um, but then as I dug more into the research and how ADHD might show up in different ways with different people, one phrase really caught my attention, which is this phrase that you might have time blindness. And so your relationship with time is either now or never. There is no in between.
Yeah.
And it just so happens to be the case that my relationship with time is that everything is now,
Mm.
which is the opposite of procrastination. I basically precrastinate. Like if I get an assignment, like I have
Mm.
to do it now, and I get all sorts of anxiety around like, oh my goodness, like even if it's due in like 4 weeks, like I'm like panicked because I
Yeah.
haven't done it yet, and it's like day two. And so I just realized like, oh, I actually still have some of the same condition that just manifests itself in a sort of different way for me.
Yeah.
And so there was a learning process basically. But the trigger for me was understanding that my children were neurodiverse and they had a variety of traits associated with that. And some of those traits were manifesting themselves in me as a child in some similar ways, in some different ways. But the curiosity led me down a path of understanding that neurodiversity itself is diverse and it shows up in different ways in different people. And that was probably the journey started 5 years ago, and I've gotten more aware ever since.
Yeah, and I love that you talk about your kids and you talk about um noticing that in them and the neurodivergency. Which is basically like we're just existing with a different operating system. It's a genetic thing. It's not something that like I feel like that term mental disorder is so off the mark. It makes that term alone just gives this stigma of like there's something wrong with you. I like to say it as a mental health difference. We all need mental health. We all need support in that area. Um, some a little more than others, but once we get it, like we get going. So when you noticed it in your child, like what brought about that? Like, um, that discovery.
And to be very vocally self-critical to you, Ron, I didn't really notice it in my kids. Like I was completely blind to it. Although, it's the same thing with myself. Like you see signs, but you kind of ignore them. You kind of brush them aside and assume,
Yeah,
"Yep, nope, the world is fine. Like we're just, this is just what it is."
yeah,
The stopping point was when my oldest, he's now in seventh grade, turning into eighth grade later this year. He was in second grade, so
awesome.
this was some time ago. His principal at the school he was in, and we were lucky because this principal was very neurodiversity aware.
Hmm,
Um,
awesome.
she had flagged us and she said, like, hey, have you guys ever considered having him diagnosed? And at first our reaction was, whoa, like that's like surprise, like coming out of left field. We knew nothing about this outside of the common misconceptions. So you can imagine all the things that we were
Yeah,
thinking about.
not my
Um,
kid.
yeah, so like we were like surprised and worried. And she said, like, look, the reason why you should kind of consider getting a diagnosis is because the school would approach the child very differently if they knew he had the condition versus didn't.
Yeah,
If he didn't have the condition, they would just like double down on basically forcing him to do the work in the way that they prescribe. They would like, let's just create more incentives or structures to like just get him to do the thing.
yeah.
While if he had the condition, they would just change the work. They would
Mhm.
modify the work and they would say like, hey, this person is different, and so the work should be different. Um,
Nice.
and so that was what kind of led us down the path of diagnosis. And the other good thing about her recommendation was she recommended a full neuropsych evaluation as opposed to sort of the 20-question questionnaire, which is like tells you a little about the
Yeah.
child outside of yes or no. That's sort of all it tells you. So we got a full view of like all of his strengths and all of his weaknesses. He got other conditions beyond
Awesome.
ADHD, for example. And so that was helpful. Like it just gave us a full sense of like, oh my goodness, this is the whole person, and
Hmm.
they're complex. And we had our second son eventually assessed as well because I learned about the genetic nature of this, and he was similar in some ways and different in some ways than my oldest, and so that's what set us down the path. Um, and as we look back, I remember when those same two kids were in kindergarten and or in preschool. I remember my wife would tell me that they would get really energetic, maybe,
Yeah.
uh, in what we call the after school playroom. You've got the school, and then after school you've got like an hour where all the kids are in a single
Hmm.
room and they're all
Yeah.
playing together. And my two kids would get super energized in that room in somewhat of a disruptive way for the teachers. And my wife actually was a teacher in that school, and so she would say like, oh, some of the other teachers are getting a bit exhausted with these two kids because they just are rowdy and like unable to control themselves. So
Hmm.
there were signs, right? Like that was a sign that like, hey, this environment wasn't a really good environment for them. It was just too many kids in too little order.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but we never read the signs. They were there, but we just like ignored them for the longest time.
Hmm. No, and I'm sure that that might have led back to the way that you were raised, the culture that you were raised in is you were just doing what came naturally to you. Would you say that that would be true?
Um, I guess my expectations for sure were driven by the culture I was raised in.
Yeah.
Um, but part of it is just like the same thing with your health. Sometimes when you feel like you're getting sick,
Yeah.
You sort of just assume like, nope, 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 it's fine. You kind of just ignore little signs. It's just because you just want life, you have a certain expectation of what life should look like. And until someone like forces you to pay attention to these things, like you're just like living your assumptions. I
Yeah.
think that's sort of more how I describe it. Like we were just living, like gaining day to going from day to
Mm.
day, living life the way we expected life should be lived. Um, and we made meaningful differences since then. Like my oldest son is now homeschooling, for example, and that's a big departure for us. And speaking of culture, like
Mm.
homeschooling was a big step to take, in terms of having the faith that a different path would be fine. Like it's just a very different path from what most people do.
Okay, so you homeschooled your children?
My
You did
oldest
that?
is now homeschooling. Yeah, my oldest is now homeschooling. He basically the short story of it is he was in that elementary school where that principal was working, and I think he really enjoyed it there. Like he went from
Hmm.
first through fifth grade. That school stops at fifth grade, so he had to move somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so at sixth grade, we applied to various schools. He went to this one school, and it was rough. Like it was a rough school. It was a rough start for him. He ended up rejecting the work. Like he was basically refusing to do the schoolwork.
Mm.
Uh, at first, I had asked my son whether he wanted me to disclose his diagnosis with the school. Um, and he said, nope, nope, let me deal with it. Let me figure it out myself. And so
Mm.
for the first 6 months or so, we didn't get any real formal accommodations from the school. And then he was struggling through it in pretty much most of his classes, by the way. Like he was struggling for sure in theater because he,
Yeah.
he didn't like theater, but he was also struggling in other classes where he actually liked that subject matter, like history, for example. He liked history, but he was struggling to get through the history work as well. Although I would say that's because he found that he knew a lot more about history than the class was teaching, and so he was just disengaged. Even though he liked history, it was the specific content they were covering was not engaging for him. So at some point we said, okay, let's get an IEP put together, talk to the school.
Hmm.
To their credit, they came up with an IEP in literally in a week. Although
Wow.
now in retrospect, I wonder whether they were really thinking very specifically about my son versus like taking a template and like, you know, putting it out there.
Yeah.
Um, we had the IEP meeting, and then 2 weeks after that meeting, the math teacher for my son called us in and gave us, it was supposed to be a 30-minute meeting, but he gave us an hour-long lecture about how, like, middle school is different from elementary school. You need to kind of pull up your
Hmm.
pants, so to speak, and like, just do, get on with it, like do the work. And then I was reflecting on that, and this was around the time I was getting trained as an ADHD coach and learning more about neurodiversity.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my goodness, like this person just doesn't get it actually. Like we just had an IEP meeting 2 weeks ago, but everything that they're saying is you have to conform with expectations. Like
Yeah.
everything that they were saying. There's nothing about understanding the child, thinking about their strengths, how do you kind of leverage their interests, like nothing about that. It was just about expectations and conformity. And the saddest part was that was probably my son's favorite teacher
Mm.
in that school. And
Wow.
so that was the moment where like he basically didn't go to school after that. Like we just pulled him out. We had no plan.
Wow.
So that was a scary moment. At first, we had talked to an educational consultant about other schools in the area, just to like, hey, we don't want to make mistakes twice, so let's kind of figure out like which schools exist and so forth. And she had asked us sort of a very interesting question. She said, like, have you ever considered homeschooling? And my initial response was no, because it just seems like a lot of work, a lot of responsibilities for the parents. And her response to us was, hey, homeschooling nowadays, especially for this age group, and he was older than like 10, oh, probably like 10 or 11. Her response was, for this age group, homeschooling is like a la carte private school,
Mm.
especially since COVID. Like you basically have a choice of like different curriculum and you can pull it together, but there is a teacher that you're working with in each of those classes. And that really opened up our mind to the possibility. And we've been doing it ever since.
Nice. Nice. And what you were talking about, like, kind of reminds me of, how like how when I was growing up, like there was several points, and a lot of it I didn't actually remember. I don't know whether it was like trauma or, my brain was protecting me from, but my mom was talking about how in second grade, like I had stood up on the desk. It's because like I had trouble making friends, and I thought, um, if I stood up on the desk, then they'd think I'm funny or something. And I'd get more friends that way, And, the thing is, my teacher never told my mom about that incident. I ended up telling her that she put me in the front of the class, um, as like a punishment or whatever. And the kids continued to make fun of me. Um, growing up. So, because like, oh, look at that kid stood on the desk, now he's in the front of the class, so he can't make any more trouble. Um, which that wasn't my intention. So it had, like once she opened that up about it, it made a lot of sense of like who I became after that,
Mm,
what my identity was, because like I didn't think that I was worthy of having friends or worthy of these other things. I was different from these other kids, in a very real sense. And, there was other stories throughout that, like, in fifth grade, they wanted to take me out, um, and put me, because I had trouble working with groups. So I ended up going to like private school, which I believe did help, because there was a lot more structure there. And I
mm,
feel like that's kind of very similar to what you're doing with homeschool, is because it's a lot more structure. It's more one-on-one. They pay attention to you. Um, I don't necessarily know if it was like a very enjoyable or flexible as homeschool, but like, once I went back to like middle school, I could remember like being in the, like breaks. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I would hide out in the bathroom because of my like anxiety and fear of social situations. Um,
yeah.
and like I can imagine, like, do you have any experiences like that growing up, yourself?
I would say that I always felt like an outsider.
Yeah.
Even though I did have some friends, like and I had a group of friends that I hang out with. I went to the same. I went through a K through 12 school and pretty much stayed there the whole time. So it was pretty much the same, mostly the same people. Even though I had like externally, superficially, I would hang out with a certain set of people, and they would seem to be my friends. I always felt separate from them,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that might have just been in my head. Probably who knows? But I never quite felt like part of the group. And social dynamics, I was always sort of very aware of social dynamics. Uh,
Yeah.
I probably would classify as highly sensitive. My third son, who we haven't spoken about, I've got four kids, Ron, so I've got like
Uh-huh.
a mini experiment here at home with all sorts of different types of people.
Great.
My third son's showing signs of high
Just a guinea
sensitivity.
pig, son.
Hmm. So
In
yeah, I
my
think he
little
probably gets
thing.
that from me.
No,
Um,
I'm sure it's in a very loving way.
yeah, so there's like pros and cons to high sensitivity. Part of it is like you can really read emotions, and that's what makes you a good, for example, a good leadership coach or life coach. You can talk to somebody and you can kind of really feel what they're feeling and sort of intuit what they're thinking. It's a useful skill at work as well, but it can be overwhelming, right? Like if you're
Hmm.
like constantly receiving all these inputs of what people are feeling, like you're having to deal with that all the time. So I felt that was a big part of my growing up experience, part of my adult experience as well. Um, yeah, the one funny thing as you were talking about standing up on that desk, I remember it was so good that the school didn't take this seriously. It's very. I studied in a Jesuit school, so a Catholic school.
Yeah.
for some reason I had gotten emotional, and I basically jump kicked the door in one of the classrooms and
Yeah.
literally unhinged it. Like literally, it was like one of
Wow.
those days. Uh,
Like
and then
Street Fighter stuff.
I know it's crazy. They didn't do anything about that. They just like brought me into whatever the disciplinary office, talked to me,
What
and
was
then
that
that's it. Like
about? Like,
there wasn't any. Like they didn't treat it too seriously. I guess this is one of the things that's sort of nice if you're dealing with someone who's got ADHD or neurodiverse. Just understand that, try not
yeah.
to escalate something that's already escalated.
Yeah.
And I struggle with this myself too with the kids. We're like, hey, if they start getting very riled up, I should just be the person who brings it back down to calm, as opposed to
Mm.
being the person who escalates it for even further, which can sometimes happen. Like if you got a few neurodiverse people interacting with each other, like they could all like
Oh yeah.
escalate things. Yeah,
Very easy.
yeah, it's very easy. Um, so that's been one of the things. I think you and I, Ron, are working on some mindfulness practices together. That's one of the benefits of that is you can just bring yourself to calm, be more mindful before you react to something.
Yeah.
It's been a very helpful set of practices for sure.
Yeah, we'll definitely get more into that, later on. But I just wanted to, dive into the fact that it's it's Asian American History Month. And, we wouldn't be the same as a culture without that. And, like without sushi, without all the seriously, there's more to it than that. Like there's many activists, many inventions, many different things that just go on and on. But particularly, like, I want to shine a light on how ADHD, since you you were you're Chinese, but you said you grew up in the Philippines. Like, how was that? How do you think that affected your particular, like, how your ADHD showed up?
Yeah. I'll tell you one story, Ron. I remember I was in college, um, and someone had come up to me and said, and I didn't do too super well in school, by the way, from grade school through high school. I did okay, but not the best. I'm the third of three boys, and my two brothers definitely did better than I did.
Hmm.
Although I suspect my oldest brother was also neurodiverse. Just looking at his behavior now in retrospect, I was like, oh, I think there's some traits there. Um, but I wasn't like the best high schooler. But by the time I got to college, I had really changed my behavior. And we can talk about that if you'd like at some point. But I
Hmm.
remember someone had come up to me and said like, "Oh, you must be a genius." And he used the local language. He used a different word, but that's what he said. And my reaction immediately to that statement was, "No, no, like I just work hard."
Yeah.
And that was what was going in my mind. And the reason why I mentioned that to you, it's a bit cultural. This belief that everything comes out of hard work,
Yeah.
that nothing else matters. It's all perspiration. Like that's all that exists, and anybody can perspire to the right outcome. It's sort of the belief.
Hmm.
And as you hear that, to some extent it resonates. Like, yeah, of course, hard work is important, and of course, you want to teach that sort of sense of working hard to everyone. Um, but there's also this belief underneath that anything you can do anything if you set your mind to it.
Yeah.
But the challenge is like sometimes minds are different, and like setting your mind
Hmm.
to it can be easier in some cases than others, and that's sort of what I learned with neurodiversity. But at the time, I was just assuming everybody. I guess the other assumption I had was that everybody is born sort of in the Aristotelian sense, like the blank slate, the tabula rasa. Everybody's born as a blank slate. They're all the same,
Yeah.
and it's really all nurture from there. And it's what I realized, especially now as a parent of four kids, is that's not totally not true. Each child is born like with all of their things. They're all very different from the moment they're
Yeah.
born. They aren't blank slates by any stretch. um, and so
Yeah.
that is the big learning, and I think culturally this belief
Hmm.
that people are blank slates, that anybody can be molded
Wow.
into this ideal person through hard work, I think is a big cultural thing as well.
Yeah, I can see how that can create like instead of like a growth mindset, it's more of like you're gonna be this because like my dad was this or whatever mindset that came into it. It doesn't give you the freedom, like you said, to have like we all are born with these particular strengths and particular gifts,
Yeah,
and talents that make us who we are and that help everything. But if we're all trying to be something that we're not, that creates this 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 distorted reality of what could have been, what can still be, because it's never too late to turn towards your dreams and towards what you really are passionate about,
yeah.
and I feel
The,
like, no, go ahead.
oh no, no, I was just reacting to what you were saying, Ron. And I think the other thing that it does is it makes you not acknowledge your own unique strengths.
Yeah.
Like it boils down who you are to simply self-regulation and persistence. Like everybody is self-regulation and persistence. There's no other strength. But you
Yeah.
realize that everybody actually different. Like you bring something unique to the world that other people don't. And this belief just ignores all that. It just makes it all sound like nope, it's all just perspiration.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, ADHD, we have strengths. We have particular strengths that like we don't look at because we're so busy being told how we don't fit in, how we're broken, how we're lazy or we're slow, which it may appear that way, but the strengths that I know I have is like divergent thinking and creativity, being able to think outside the box, being able to see things in a different way. Because when you're trying to solve a complex problem, like say, education for neurodivergence in the current public school system, you need to have input from as many people as possible, including the children that you're teaching, because they know to a degree like how they want to learn. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they like, some of the best schools that I've read about are, they don't teach how to read right away. They teach it later on, because they want them to see reading as fun. Because when you think of reading as fun, and especially if learning is fun and that love of learning, like the the possibilities are limitless, like for that child and that child's future. And that, instead of having assigned literature like in America where you got to read the classics, you hate reading. A lot of people hate reading. I, on the other hand, always loved reading. Like I've always had that love of learning. It is one of my signature strengths, and like, I would even get to the point where like my mom, like I would be sneaking reading a book while I'm supposed to be sleeping. Like I don't know if my mom was secretly proud, but like I'd still get in trouble, which is funny.
Because you maybe you wouldn't wake up the next morning and be late to school.
Yeah,
Anyway,
or whatever.
yeah,
Yeah, but I mean, it's about fostering that type of like learning. Like, yeah, books are fun, and maybe choose the books that are like that excite you, so you can continue to read. Because reading is good in general, unless it's you're reading like always reading comic books or whatever.
yeah.
It's not necessarily reading. There's some words in there, but yeah,
It's funny. It reminds me of this picture of, you draw these cartoons and there's like this little child in the cartoon and there's a little speech bubble that says, "What's the point?" And like they're
yeah,
staunch and saying like, "What's the point?" And that sort of reminds me of sort of the ADHD person who really just cares. And obviously that image is a bit pejorative. It's sort of like, oh, painting things in somewhat of a negative light. But it reminds me of Stephen Covey. And if you're familiar with Stephen Covey's like Seven Habits of Effective People,
Yeah.
I really like his framework, and one of his frameworks points in the framework is begin with the end in mind.
Yeah.
Whenever you set out on a task, like begin with the end in mind, think about where you're going, and then figure out, all the steps you need to get there. That's the same thing. Like when a child's asking, like, what's the point? They're just beginning with the end in mind. They just want to know, like, if I'm gonna go be doing this work, like, where am I going with this? Like, why does it matter?
Yeah.
And it's really valuable. Like when you're an adult, that's a valuable skill. But when you're a child, apparently you teach children to ignore that all the time. Just do the work, just do the math page, do the language page, and they have no idea what any of this is for.
Yeah. Like kind of like, yeah, it's different. Um, so you became like what's the leadership coach part of that? You know, you said you're an ADHD coach. Is that like the same thing or is that different?
Yeah. So I work. I've got a full-time role at a technology company where I'm a leader in that organization.
Hmm.
And so it's sort of just because of the nature of that role, the type of clients that I end up seeing are typically people who work in technology, who are probably here on the West Coast, and who are looking for when they come to coaching, they're not just looking for ADHD coaching, they're kind of looking for leadership coaching as well. Like how do I show up as a leader in the workplace in the context of, neurodiverse traits. I get both types of clients. Some clients come in specifically knowing they're neurodiverse and want to make that be a key point of the coaching, and some
Hmm.
others come in with more of just a leadership bent, like, oh, I want to see how I can increase my potential at work. I want to see how I can progress to the higher levels of leadership in this organization. And the funny thing is, Ron, even though most of those people aren't necessarily diagnosed neurodivergent, often they come in with traits. Everybody has their own little sort of
Yeah.
constellation of traits. And there has been some other studies that show that in the technology industry, like some other industries, there is a higher proportion of neurodivergent talent in this
Yeah.
industry, just because of the nature of the work and how actually some of the strengths of neurodivergence come in a positive way
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
this line of work. And so, that's how they all blend in my world. So I often introduce myself in three ways. I talk about my full-time role as a leader in technology, and then my role as a coach, and then my role as a parent, and they all blend, as you can see, because
Yeah.
they all kind of combine human development as well as neurodivergence in different ways.
No, that's awesome. How did that come about? How did you want to start to pursue that? Like what brought that about?
Yeah, there was a very specific moment. I was uh, I was in my parental leave for my fourth child. She was really small. She was an infant at the time. I remember sitting in the rocking chair over in the other room, holding
Hmm.
her. And I was going through some challenges with my two older ones, as you can imagine, like, oh, school challenges, all that stuff. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, now that I've got four and these traits are genetic, I kind of really need to get better at being a parent because
Yeah.
I've got a whole crew of them. And so that's the moment I decided to go back and get trained as an ADHD coach. I was already trained as a leadership coach back when I was in business school more than 10 years ago. So coaching itself wasn't new to me, but it was a very specific context. It was, business school students and people in sort of a corporate culture and
Hmm.
coaching them. So ADHD coaching was had a different sort of lens to it. So I found the training valuable. So that's how I got back into it. I've also always found that coaching and helping was a big part of who I was as a person.
Yeah.
Sort of like understanding that you've always carried that in yourself over the many years. And this was just a nice way of expressing that in a new way.
That's awesome. You know, and yeah, coaching is huge. Coaching for me has really helped me. You know, and it's also like it helps when I get to see that transformation. When I get to see, when I get to be, that person that I wish I had. Um, so how does coaching show up for you? What are like the big key elements that you typically see when you coach?
I
Like
was
what
saying
do you
sort
try to
of
do?
what I try to do. Okay, okay. I was thinking about themes versus like what I try to do.
Well, you can
Um,
do both.
yeah. So in terms of what I do, The two things that are common to everyone, like everybody goes through these two things. One is the via character strengths inventory,
Hmm.
because I often find that people don't really know what they're good at coming into coaching. And this is both for neurodivergent and other folks. Like you just don't, you
Yeah.
just kind of ignore what makes you good and what makes you unique. And so that's often a
But we're
fairly
focusing on the
helpful,
negative.
always focus on the negative. Yeah. So
Yeah.
helpful grounding. And then the second one is sort of a life wheel exercise. And this is very common in coaching. The life wheel, it basically just has, these different dimensions of your life, and you're asked to rate it in terms of your level of satisfaction with that specific dimension. The only
Mhm.
unique thing I do with the life wheel is I actually ask them to create this focus. Very often are predefined for you. And
Mhm.
so in my world, I actually kind of work with people to define their own dimensions, because I actually find that people define the dimensions of their life in very different ways. Um, and
Wow.
so you define their dimensions and then you rate them in terms of satisfaction and so forth. So those two kind of elements are standard. And then the rest of it kind of tends to be specific to an individual in terms of what they would like to cover and focus on. In terms of themes, I guess I already mentioned one of them. One theme in general is just this blindness to what makes you unique and great. It's just a very common challenge. When you ask people about it, everybody knows. Like I guess everybody knows deep inside what that is,
Yeah.
but they just don't recognize it. They don't recognize it. They don't appreciate it. They don't use it.
Mhm.
It's sort of just there at the back of their mind, like, yeah, I'm kind of good at this, but like, whatever. I'm moving on to whatever I'm not good at.
Yeah.
Um, and like unlocking that, I think is really helpful. The other thing that I would mention is that there's often this recurrence when you coach someone for a long enough period of time, where they start with a topic, and then they sort of address it, but somewhat at a more superficial level, and it recurs. At
Yeah.
some point, a certain amount of time in the future, it sort of comes back, and it's unclear. It's unclear what the right path is sometimes in those cases, because sometimes it's a balance between two things. How much should I put into work in the
Mhm.
in versus life, and but I've noticed that a lot with people, where there's a recurrence of a theme. And I guess if you're thinking about things in the context of mindfulness, the very first step is just to be aware of it. And sometimes, you don't even have to solve it. It's just more of an awareness, like, oh, I'm aware that this issue is recurring, and
Mhm.
I'm aware that I'm struggling to balance how to make choices against this theme, and how to put when to push and when to pull, and when to be
Yeah.
dissatisfied with it and when to be accepting of it. So that's another thing that comes up often.
So what would you say is like an example of a theme, um, that somebody might
Yeah.
struggle with?
One of those is, especially with folks with ADHD, is the I need to get better organized.
Mhm.
And then the opposite of it, that is sort of the obvious version. The opposite of it is, I am organized enough to be
Yeah.
successful.
Yeah.
It's just like it's just like, stop striving to be more organized. Like, just you are organized enough to be successful.
Yeah. Just like not trying to be perfectly organized. Like it
Yeah.
goes back into that perfectionist
Hmm.
mindset where you're like, well, I need this to be organized and all this is like over here. That doesn't necessarily have to, if you're organized, like you're saying, if you're organized enough, like who cares? Like you're never going to be able to organize everything. Life is just going to be working against you at every turn. It's like once I cut the grass, it's done. It's like it's already going to need to be cut probably in 2 days. So I just got to be happy that I did it. Happy that it got done and like, okay, on to the next thing. Um, and Wayne, I loved how you talked about mindfulness and character strengths. And that kind of leads into like what we're doing right now is we're taking that MBSP certification, which is mindfulness based strength practice, which for me has been a total life changer, and I am really just blessed and lucky to have found that. And I honestly think it's the best thing since sliced bread when it comes to like 88. Like if you had one tool for ADHD, this would be it. Like this would be the go-to. What are your thoughts on that? Um,
I tend to
how
agree
has it
with you.
affected your life and how has it affected your coaching?
I tend to agree with you, Ron. I think it's the combination of on the mindfulness side, the ability to pause. Like that's basically what mindfulness is. It's the ability to
Yeah.
pause and bring greater awareness to what's happening. And with ADHD, as you know, the impulsiveness is just really the inability to pause. Like you just jump straight into the next thing without like, just realizing what's going on before you
Yeah.
make a choice. Super helpful. Like super helpful in addressing that specific sort of challenge, but also very calming in a way. Mindfulness is
Hmm.
about bringing that greater inner peace and calm. And then I like the character strengths aspect because nobody feels satisfied with just being less impulsive, less inattentive. Like everybody wants to be more of something rather than less of something.
Yeah.
And that's where the character strengths part really comes in, where like you really understand like what makes me me, what is the thing, that value that is so essential to who I am, and just living that and internalizing that. This is actually the other thing I should have mentioned to you earlier on in terms of themes. When people first go through the character strengths inventory,
Hmm.
they look at it and they quickly dismiss it.
Oh yeah. Oh
And like look
yeah.
at it and like, oh yeah, of course I love learning. Moving on. And you really have to stop them and like, yeah, let's talk about love of learning. Let's talk about like give me 5 examples of times when you really exercise love of learning. Like you kind of have to pause, like get them to savor like those strengths and understand how it shows up and understand why it's so essential to them. And then once they start really getting to that mind space of like, oh yeah, this is really essential to me, and this is really what makes me who I am, what makes me satisfied, what makes me effective and productive, then it starts becoming powerful. Um, and
Yeah.
a lot of people who are ADHD and neurodivergent just need a lot of that. They need to recognize the strengths in addition to the challenges.
Oh yeah, especially kindness. Like the thing is like we're coming from a place and it kind of shows up when they're answering okay, I got that. Like move on. Let's talk about what I don't have. And it's always to that negative. Because like our whole life is focusing on getting better at what we're bad at. And it's not that coming from that point of view is like is so hard. It's such a harder route and it's usually very little success. When you bring in strengths, especially like kindness or whatever, it's like you're focusing on doing those things better, getting better at the strengths, and those strengths help you. And the things that you struggle with will automatically almost start to go you get better with because you're focusing in a direction. Like it's hard to be bad when you're doing good things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The
That's
idea is
cool.
that you would use another strength to help you become better at this strength you're not super used to using. And for me, for example, one of those strengths that I'm not super used to using is bravery. Like I'm just not the type of person who's particularly brave, but I am a person who's really honest. Like honest is one of my top 5 signature strengths. So,
Yeah.
and honesty and bravery are actually in the same family of strengths.
Yeah.
And so what I do is when I feel like I need to be brave, rather than thinking about it as like I need to be brave, I think about it as I need to be more honest. So when I
Mhm.
feel, for example, if I'm about to give a presentation, like in front of a really big audience, it requires a little bit of courage and bravery to stand up in front of all those
Oh
people.
yeah.
So what I harness instead is the honesty. I harness this thought that I really want to say something, it's honesty, right? Like you have a message to deliver and you want to share it with others, and so it's
Yeah.
harnessing the honesty in me, and I get a lot of energy from that just shows up as bravery, because then I'm out there and talking to all these people, but it's really not bravery. Like I'm still like kind of anxious and scared about this, but like the honesty helps me. So that's one way. Like you're not really just focused on what you're bad at. You're using the things you're good at to get better at the things that you may be less good at.
Yeah, and that's using like a mindful perspective and being creative with it, as well. And like for me too, like perseverance is like one of my lower strengths, but I often see that it shows up a lot. And I don't see it as like it's like those strengths have to go into place. There's 24 strengths. They all can't be at the top. They all can't be at the bottom. So they have to fit in some. You have each and every person has those strengths and has the ability to dig deep into those strengths. It's just perseverance isn't like one of the ones where it just comes naturally, like love of learning. I feel like it's not a weakness. It's just not a readily available strength. It's not something that I can draw on easily. I have to kind of dig a little deeper for that one. Like at work this week, I'm part of this, I'm leading this health and wellness committee, which has been, like the mental health at the place that I work is not a big priority. So it's been like a real challenge, but it's really like I see it as like it takes perseverance, it takes courage. And one of the things I do is I lead with a mindfulness meditation before that. And I'm, it's like bringing that in. And I've been doing it. And the part of me is like, you know what? You got a lot doing to do this week. Maybe you shouldn't do that. But another part of me is like, I want to do the loving um, gratitude meditation. And like, that one was like, I was scared to do that one because like bringing loving like love talking about love and gratitude and in like a place where that doesn't get brought up is like I just was like there's gonna be a lot of pushback um but like what brought me through it was the idea is like if just one person gets something out of it, it's worth it. And honestly, like they loved it. They really like thought it was a powerful exercise, and because I want to bring that practice, that mindfulness practice into other, like this kindness movement that I'm trying to do. And that's like, because ADHD people with ADHD, that is one of the most difficult things we can do for ourselves is be kind because we don't know what that looks like. They say, "Oh, just be kind, be compassionate." Like, what does that even mean? Like all I know is how to be hard. All I've been shown is like how to be hard. Like why I'm not good enough. And now you're like, how do I even be kind? But we all do know how to be kind. We just kind of got to be like given some examples and shown some ways of doing that. And this world needs more. Like kindness is such a huge strength because you can change entire cultures with kindness. I mean, look at Gandhi, like, and
Mm.
Martin Luther King. Like, they did it in a kind and loving way. And I feel like with mental health, especially, it needs it. It needs that type of advocating, and that
Yeah,
takes courage as well.
yeah, I love that, Ron. The other thing I love about sort of the character strengths is how you do character strengths combinations.
Yeah.
And I agree with you, like on kindness, Martin Luther King and Gandhi, they had a very courageous, a very energetic and zestful kind of kindness. It wasn't like they were kind and sitting back in the back row and just waiting for things to happen to
Yeah.
them, right? Like they were out there, they were advocating, they were doing things. So I love those examples.
Yeah,
I sort of it's sort of like the words that I like are the words strong kindness. It's not a
oh
weak kind of
yeah,
kindness, it's like a very strong kind of kindness.
and kind of changing that dynamic because I feel like and I'm coming from that same mindset of like kindness is weakness. You've got to be hard. You've got to show your gangster face or whatever that is, like because you're gonna get stepped on, you're gonna get walked on, you're gonna get taken advantage. Yeah, and if you're kind, people are gonna try to take advantage of that. But that's where boundaries come in. You're like, and I don't like and that's where mindfulness and character strengths and like really seeing people and understanding that people that are like unkind and that do things are just really suffering from some type of trauma, and I can feel for that trauma because I've had trauma, and I'm continuing to heal from that, and I can see myself in them,
Mm.
so I'm like, but I also don't get that close with those people because like I understand where they're at. But it's not like I don't respect them. It's not that I don't talk to them with kindness when the opportunity shows up. I just don't really invest a lot of emotional attachment, because I know that I'm going to get hurt. And I'm more about helping the people that are trying to help themselves because that's the only people that are really going to change. Like, I wish I could just say a bunch of kind words and that was it. But I know me and I know other people. It's like, I didn't want to change who I was until I decided that I needed to change who I was, that I needed help.
Yeah.
And that's just how we work, how we operate.
Mm-hmm.
But I can
Totally.
still like love that person, and treat them as a human being and feel for them, you know.
Absolutely.
So yeah, this is do you have any like ways that people can contact you or that my audience can get in touch with you if they want to reach out?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, Ron. You can find me on LinkedIn. So just look for Wayne Wright U. That's WAINWRIGHT. That's my first name, and then my last name CU, two letters YU.
Okay,
And I've
LinkedIn.
got a website as well, wainwrightu.com. And so if you're interested in having a conversation with me, it's easy enough to book a 30-minute call with me over there.
Yeah, and I'll definitely put that in the show notes so that people can really connect with you because like what you're offering is amazing. And I can imagine like the amount it does take courage, it does take perseverance, especially with some people are trying to push back on that, you know uh,
Absolutely, Ron.
well, it's been a lovely conversation. I'm glad to have you on the show. Thank you, Wayne, for coming on.
Thank you so much, Ron. And thanks for all the good work you're doing as well.
I appreciate that.
Have a good day.
And to all my listeners, this has been another amazing step in a journey of self-discovery. This has been educational for me, and I hope that it's been there for you. And again, if you want to connect with Wayne, hit him up on that LinkedIn or his website, which will be in the show notes. Also, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being beautifully different. If you want to talk more about ADHD, depression, culture, or just need a safe place to be heard, I'm offering free coaching calls at youradhdguy.com. And if you don't like talking, you can always shoot me an email, whatever works for you. And even better, I have the Kindness Circle, a private Facebook group that was designed specifically for people that have ADHD and struggle with depression, to come and feel safe and to get that kindness that you deserve. Come as you are. I prefer that, as always. And until next time, I'm Ron, your ADHD guy, reminding you, you are worthy exactly as you are, and may the source be with you.